The very first launch of your no-code app will not be your last launch. At least it shouldn't be. I see so many people come into the app space and they start building their apps thinking that they only get one shot, that their very first launch is kind of like their make it or break it moment with their app. And to be honest, it puts a ton of pressure on their shoulders, but it also leads them in the wrong directions in terms of their development and launch strategy itself. Now, if you've stepped even an inch into the app space at this point, then you understand the concept of an MVP or a minimum viable product. But what I see happening is not a full understanding of the purpose behind the MVP and what results that MVP should specifically drive for you as the app's founder. If you are heading into development or working toward your launch and you are thinking that it has to be perfect and you're feeling pressure and maybe even hesitation to launch your app because you feel like when you launch, that's it. The world is going to see your app, and from there, the users are going to be the deciders, and that's kind of your make it or break it moment, right? If you're feeling that way, then you need to stick around until the end of this video. This video is for you. Now we're going to talk through the results that you need to be getting from your first launch, and we're also going to look at some examples of popular apps that you have probably seen and use on a day-to-day basis so that you can see what their first launch looked like versus what they look like now. If you're new around here, my name is Kristen. I'm the co-founder of Coaching No Code Apps. We help non-technical entrepreneurs build custom apps so they can launch their app-based businesses or grow their existing businesses all without coding. And we release new videos on no-code apps and launching your app-based business every single week. So subscribe to the channel below if you want to see more on that. So despite what Eminem has told you, you do not only get one shot with your app. We preach day in and day out with our students and our clients and on this channel that you really want to launch early and quickly, and you want to execute a series of launches with each launch having its own individual goal. In a minute, we're going to go through what those goals are so that you can understand the launches and really the purpose of your MVP and the different versions beyond that. But first, I actually want to open up an app and just walk through the before and then the current version of the app so that we can see firsthand and just right off the bat what we're talking about here. All right, so you may or may not use Twitch. I don't personally use Twitch, but it's a really good example, and you can find lots of screenshots and videos of what it used to look like. So it's a great representation of what we're talking about here. So I have this article pulled up from Business Insider, and it just has screenshots of what the Twitch interface looked like when it first launched. So as you can see here, this is just a screenshot. It used to be called Justin TV, and it looked like this. Not very pretty, not very fancy or flashy. It looks very basic. Now, if we fast forward to today, this is what Twitch looks like. And you can see this is very, very different. If you scroll down, it looks clean, it looks sleek. There is clearly different functionality. I mean, the name has changed, the entire business has pivoted, and it's a platform that is wildly successful. So again, let's just compare this. Look at this screenshot here of what it looked like when it first launched, and look at it now. It's completely different. So going back to the individual goals of your launches, the reason why I wanted to start with this Twitch example is because it hits on a few different areas that are going to be relevant to your app. You see, most people think of their starting point and their ideal finish line. So they think of where they're starting now, which is usually just having an idea for an app, and then they think of what they envision their finish line looking like, which is having a business that generates a really solid revenue that supports them financially and supports the type of lifestyle they want, right? And so a lot of people think, all right, starting point is idea and finish line is having a business that makes me money through my app. And because of that, when they start the actual development of their idea, they are aiming for that finish line, but they're all the way back at their starting point. And realistically, you need to have lots of smaller, more incremental steps that will take you toward that finish line. And the goals of each of the launches that you're going to do are critical in order to make sure that you are consistently staying steered towards that finish line. I want you to think about that in between period from idea to finish line as a period containing 3 different phases. The first phase is validation, and the second phase is operations. The third phase is growth and scale. Now, we're looking at your app and your business as a whole as we consider these 3 phases. So validation is when you're making sure that, number one, the problem you want to solve exists and that people need a solution to that problem. Number two, that you have come up with a feature set that can in fact solve that problem. And number three, that people will repeatedly pay you in order to solve the problem with your solution. So it's really just a series of validation steps. Now, once you've validated the problem, the product, the solution, the need for the solution, then you know that there is a demand for your solution, right? If people are repeatedly paying you for the app you've built, then there is some demand there. So you can move forward then into the operational phase. Now, a lot of people think idea to scale, right? But in reality, once you have that validation and you are seeing demand come in order to scale, you have to go through more of an operational phase. And this is kind of where you're seeing the demand come through, but some of the things that you're doing at that time are not scalable. You're probably doing a lot of things on your own. And so you start to create systems, repeatable systems for both your users and yourself as a business owner and for your business as a whole. Once you have the demand on top of the systems that you've created to allow things to be repeatable, then you can start to scale. Okay, so we have these 3 phases for your app in your business. Right now, we're zooming in on that validation stage because if you are planning your app idea right now, you're thinking about it, or maybe you've started building it, but you haven't launched it to your users yet, then that is the stage that you're in. So while you might be thinking about the scale stage and that finish line, the reality is you are in this validation stage and you need to step back, put yourself there, and focus your sights on the goals that are most applicable to where you're at right now. Knowing you are in that validation stage, let's talk about the different types of validation you need in order to move through that stage. So the first thing you need is problem validation. You should not be thinking about an app idea and then trying to figure out how to apply the app idea. You should be finding a problem and validating that that problem is in fact a problem for people, that people do in fact need a solution to that problem that can solve the problem in different or better ways. And you really just need to make sure that it makes sense to even come up with an app idea in the first place. Now, you're probably at a stage, or you've gone through a stage where you've experienced a problem or you know a problem is there, and kind of in conjunction with that, you're coming up with your app idea on the side of kind of inspecting this problem, and that's okay. You can do that, but you need to make sure you validate the problem first. Then you move on to fleshing out what that app should look like in order to solve the problem. Now, this is idea validation. So you had problem validation. Now you need idea validation. So you have an idea of how to solve this problem. So now you're going to think about the features that might be needed in order to solve the problem, and you're going to do market research, you're going to have conversations with people, and you're going to make sure that the idea you have makes sense to build. I'm talking about the specific features involved in how you're going to solve the problem. Now, we're not going to go through idea validation in this video because we have another video on that, and I definitely recommend checking it out after this, but that's that next stage of validation that you'll go through. Now, once you have validated the problem, you have validated your idea, then you need to validate your product, because with idea validation, you have validation that your hypothesis will solve the problem you've identified, right? But it's a hypothesis nonetheless. So you need to actually create the very first version of what your idea looks like and then validate that hypothesis. Really, this is just an experiment. So problem validation, idea validation, product validation. Now, product validation is where you build that minimum viable product or your pilot app. So you take the idea that you have, you build out the minimal core features, nothing fancy, nothing sleek, and you validate your product. Okay, so you have the problem, you have the idea, now you have the product, so you can test your hypothesis and prove that yes, it works, or no, it doesn't work, and now I need to change. Here's where we're going to take it back to that Twitch example. So a lot of people will come in, again, thinking of their starting point, which is their idea, and thinking of the finish line. And they think that their first launch is kind of like the decider on whether or not they cross that finish line. But if we look back at a company, a platform like Twitch, that changed its name, they changed their entire product purpose, they changed their entire product, and they eventually grew into a very successful platform. They didn't launch and then either cross the finish line or not cross the finish line. They launched a hypothesis, it was an experiment, they learned from it, and they pivoted. And then they changed their product and they did more experiments, right? It was just a further extension of that experiment. They got feedback and they pivoted. They changed their name. Again, they changed their product. They changed so many things. They changed their whole company. I mean, you've heard of so many companies that have done the exact same thing. YouTube has done this. If I'm not mistaken, I believe YouTube was originally intended to be a dating app of some sort. And look at us now. We're having a conversation about launching apps. So the first launch is not the finish line launch. The first launch is product validation. And that product validation is not make it or break it. If you do not get the validation that you want, then it's change it, not break it, change it. And that's the disconnect that I see people having, is they think that first launch, if it's not perfect, then it's a failure. But that couldn't be further from the truth unless you let that become your truth. Let's take a look at another. Facebook. I have another Business Insider article pulled up just because it shows some screenshots of Facebook from, let's see, 2005. You probably use Facebook regularly. If you don't, that's okay. We're gonna flash forward in just a minute, but you can see it's very basic. Facebook started out with one very, very small target market in one very, very specific location with one very specific purpose. And look at us now, we're living in a metaverse. So you can see that Facebook follows the same kind of path as Twitch. So we'll just kind of scroll down and see some of these screenshots here. I mean, this, it looks vastly different today. So let's flash forward. I just have our own free Facebook group open on the page here. If you're not in there, go and join. It's a great place to chat about more no-code app related stuff. It's called the No Code App Entrepreneur, but you can see that clearly, I mean, just glancing at the interface alone, it is very different. We have a lot of resources for learning Bubble. We have courses and memberships, We also have a private mentorship program where we guide entrepreneurs from their idea stage to bringing those first pilot users on board. And through all of that, through all the conversations we have with people and all the coaching that we do, this comes up a lot, this fear of perfection with the first launch. Even when we are focusing our sights on a pilot launch and pilot users and product validation, it is so hard to pull yourself away from thinking that your first launch is your make it or break it moment with your app. Because of that fear, it so often drives people to build more into their first version app than they really should. And when they do that, they are skewing the results they're going to be able to get from their launch or the data they're going to be able to pull. Because remember, you're in this validation period with your app and your business. So problem validation, idea validation, product validation. But if you start building things that are really more appropriate for later stages with your app and your business, then you're not going to be able to effectively get that product validation. If you are pulling the things that are going to be important later and focusing on them now, then you're turning your hypothesis into a pure guess. Now you might be saying, but those extra features or those nice to haves, they add more value to my app. And so therefore people are going to want to use it more. And that might be your train of thought. It makes sense. It's human nature to think more stuff, more product, more features equals more value, right? We've been trained to think that way through all of the ads we constantly consume. But more is not more value when it comes to your app. So while you may be thinking that building more is going to make your app more valuable to users, you're really detracting from that value in two different ways. Number one, you are muddying the water for your users. There is a tipping point where a person is going to want to use your app because they think that the feature set you offer and the problem you solve and the outcome you enable are exactly what they need. But there's a tipping point where when you offer so much more beyond that, and there are features in there that they just don't really think they need, then they're going to start attaching those extra features to the price they are paying, and they're going to start thinking, well, I'm paying for things I don't need. So you're detracting value for them because they just don't find those things valuable. Now, they might, but it's detracting value from you because you cannot know whether they find them valuable unless you validate the core set of features first through your product validation, and you actually get people paying for those core features. Then you can add on more value from there incrementally to test and validate and make sure that what you're adding is in fact valuable and it's not tipping you over to the other side where people just don't really need the features you're offering. So to put it really simply, you're never going to be able to get a gauge on how valuable those extra features you want to build are until you can get a gauge on how valuable users are finding your initial MVP features in the first place. To simplify it even further, think about trying to create the absolute perfect recipe. Okay, so you're in the kitchen, you got all your spices and your seasonings, you're over the stove, you're doing all the things. Well, you're not going to take all of the ingredients, the spices, the seasonings, and put everything in together right from the start that you think is going to be needed to create that perfect vision that you're thinking of for this meal or this recipe, right? You're going to start with a baseline. You're going to add a little bit in. You're going to taste it. You're going to let it simmer a little bit. You're going to taste it again. You're going to add a little bit more, right? And you're going to keep doing that. You're going to let some other people taste it. And then you're going to, you're going to keep doing that until you've gotten to that perfect point with the recipe. But your app is really no different, right? Don't add everything in right from the beginning because then you're not going to be able to do your taste tests along the way, and you're not going to be able to make small adjustments toward the finish line. Instead, what you're going to have to do is backtrack. Now, if you do any cooking, once you add things in, it's pretty hard to backtrack unless you want to start over. And I unfortunately see people doing that way too often with their apps because that's how they've approached it. They've done as much as they possibly can to launch at the finish line. And then when they realize that they can't make small adjustments because they launched too much, they have to scrap it all and they have to backtrack. And wow, that is a waste of time and money and energy. And I don't want to see you going through that too. So look, this launch that you are moving toward is not your make it or break it moment. And now I want to make sure that you are launching the right features because again, to drive this home, problem validation, idea validation, product validation. Product validation is where you're building your product and you have to build the right core set of features to test for value, to then find what more is going to add further value from there. Now, we have a free training and template that will guide you through this. It's going to take your idea, deconstruct it through a really systematized process, and pull out those core features that you should be building now, and then show you which ones you should wait on until later. So to get access to that free template and training, head to coachingnocodeapps.com/perfect-pilot. I'm going to link it in the description below as well. Make sure to grab that from here so that you can head off in the right direction. And instead of launching at the finish line or trying to launch at the finish line, you can launch correctly and then keep yourself aimed at that finish line from there on out. All right, thanks so much for watching. I hope you found this helpful, and we'll see you in the next one.